A king's handshake could once silence the drums of war more effectively than any written treaty. Long before complex legal documents, ancient diplomacy spoke a universal language of powerful, silent rituals. This video will reveal 26 of these unspoken strategies that built empires and secured peace for centuries. We will uncover how a shared meal, a specific posture, or even a gifted animal could communicate trust and intent with a clarity words often failed to achieve. You will gain a completely new lens for understanding international relations, seeing the hidden symbolic world that operated beneath the surface of history. How did a simple cup of wine become a binding contract? What secret meaning was hidden in the way a diplomat entered a room? By the end, you will see the ghost of these rituals in every modern handshake between world leaders. What does it truly take to build trust between powerful rivals without saying a word? A shared meal was far more than an act of hospitality. It was the original peace treaty, a silent covenant built around the most basic human need. To break bread with a potential enemy was to engage in a profound act of mutual vulnerability. The host, by offering food and drink, demonstrated good faith, proving the provisions were safe to consume. The guest, by accepting and eating, signaled trust and a willingness to engage peacefully. This simple act transformed a stranger into a guest, creating a sacred bond of obligation that was understood across cultures, from the nomadic tribes of the steppes to the royal courts of Europe. The meal itself became a stage for unspoken communication. The quality of the food reflected the host's wealth and generosity. The seating arrangements established hierarchy and respect. Even the act of sharing a single cup of wine was a powerful statement. Both parties drank from the same vessel, a tangible demonstration that they trusted each other with their very lives. To poison the wine would be to poison yourself. This ritual forced a moment of absolute clarity, cutting through the fog of political posturing. A shared table became the first and most fundamental silent agreement, a place where wars could be averted with a single, symbolic gesture of trust. The shared libation elevated diplomacy from a worldly negotiation to a sacred covenant. Imagine the scene not as a simple offering, but as a meticulously choreographed performance of trust and consequence. Two leaders would stand together, each holding a vessel containing a portion of their own nation's wealth, be it wine, oil, or honey. The act of pouring this precious liquid onto the earth was a powerful, multi-layered message. First, it was a shared sacrifice, a tangible loss of value that demonstrated a mutual commitment to the pact being formed. More importantly, it invoked a divine witness. By calling upon a specific god or goddess to observe the act, the leaders were placing their agreement under a jurisdiction far higher than any human court. A libation to a god of war like Ares or Mars signaled a fierce military alliance, a promise of combined strength. An offering to a deity of commerce or harvest, however, hinted at a future of peaceful trade and shared prosperity. The choice of deity was itself a silent but potent clause in the unwritten treaty. This ritual created a spiritual bond that made betrayal not just a political misstep, but an act of sacrilege, inviting divine retribution. It was the ultimate deterrent, a silent guarantee sealed not with a signature, but with a splash of wine upon the ground. This profound act of shared sacrifice finds a more intimate echo in the next ritual, one that brought the divine promise down to the human level, the breaking of bread. This silent covenant forged over food and drink relied on a shared vulnerability, a test of trust passed with every bite and sip. Yet the feast itself was a complex language, a stage where every detail, from the seating to the seasoning, carried a deliberate message. The arrangement of guests was never accidental. A place of honor to the right of the host signaled deep respect, while a seat far down the table could be a subtle, yet unmistakable, expression of contempt or a deliberate power play. The order in which dishes were served also spoke volumes, often reinforcing the hierarchy of the attendees. The most prized delicacies, the rarest wines, were offered first to the most important guest, a public acknowledgement of their status. The menu was a testament to the host's resources. An abundance of roasted meats, exotic fruits, and fine spices was not just about generosity. It was a silent boast of economic strength and agricultural plenty, a demonstration that this kingdom or tribe was prosperous and powerful. To accept this hospitality was to tacitly acknowledge that power. For the guest, eating the food was an act of immense trust, a belief that the host's intentions were honorable. This created a temporary but powerful bond, a shared community where, for the duration of the meal, they were not rivals but companions. A refusal to eat, however, was a diplomatic catastrophe, an accusation of treachery delivered without a single word. These feasts could stretch for days, becoming a marathon of social assessment. Away from the formality of the negotiation table, true characters could emerge. Alliances were solidified not through dry clauses, but through laughter and stories shared over endless cups of wine. The generosity displayed at the banquet table set the tone for the negotiations to come, creating an unspoken debt of gratitude. After such a display of hospitality, how could one be overly aggressive in their demands? The body itself, however, held a language even more primal than the feast. But this dance of diplomacy was not confined to the table. The very way diplomats positioned their bodies spoke a language more immediate than any spoken promise. In the silent theater of first contact, posture was power. To sit together on the ground was a profound gesture. It stripped away the trappings of rank and wealth, creating a temporary state of pure equality. Both parties, regardless of their army's size or their treasury's depth, lowered themselves to the same humble level. This act of shared humility signaled a genuine desire to negotiate as partners, not as master and servant. Conversely, a host who remained standing while a guest was seated could be projecting an air of unassailable authority, a silent declaration that they held the upper hand. The specifics were meticulously negotiated. In some African kingdoms, the type of stool a visiting ambassador was offered was a direct statement of their perceived status. An ornate, high-backed chair for an equal, a simple, low stool for a subordinate. There are accounts of diplomatic meetings stalling before a single word was exchanged, deadlocked over a few inches of seat height. This was not petty squabbling. It was the essential first move in a high-stakes game where accepting a lower seat meant accepting a lesser position in the coming talks. The body itself became the first document to be read and interpreted, setting an unshakable psychological tone for everything that followed. And just as the body communicated status, so too did the gifts that changed hands, transforming objects into powerful messengers. A diplomat's acceptance of a simple cup of water could forge a bond stronger than any written oath. In the sun-scorched realms of the Middle East and North Africa, the most profound diplomatic offer was not gold or jewels, but the elemental gifts of water and salt. To present these essentials to a visitor was to engage in a ritual of absolute commitment. Water, the very substance of life in an unforgiving landscape, was a promise of sustenance and safe passage. Salt, used to preserve food and thus ensure survival through lean times, represented an enduring covenant, a pact meant to last. The act of sharing them transformed a host and guest relationship into something sacred. Once a traveler drank your water or tasted your salt, they came under your protection. To betray that trust, to bring harm to someone who had partaken of your salt, was considered one of the most dishonorable acts imaginable, a violation that transcended political rivalry and entered the realm of profound moral failure. This ritual cut through all potential deception, creating an immediate, non-negotiable layer of safety. It acknowledged a truth deeper than territorial disputes or trade negotiations, that survival itself was a shared human endeavor. By offering the basics of life, a host was not just being polite, they were making a silent vow, "I will ensure you live," and in accepting, the guest vowed in return, "I will respect your authority and your home." This powerful exchange of elemental trust was often just the opening move in a far more elaborate and symbolic conversation conducted through gifts. A royal seal pressed into warm wax was more than a signature, it was an extension of the monarch's very soul. When a pharaoh sent his personal signet ring to a rival emperor, or a high king gifted a ceremonial dagger he had worn for years, this was the ultimate gamble of trust. This exchange of royal insignia was diplomacy at its most intimate and daring. The object given was never chosen at random. It was an item steeped in the ruler's identity, a piece of their ceremonial power, like a crown jewel or a scepter used in coronations. By handing it over, a leader was offering a fragment of their own sovereignty as collateral. The recipient now held a tangible piece of the giver's authority, a silent hostage that guaranteed the ruler's good faith. To betray the agreement would be to desecrate this symbolic essence, an act that was believed to weaken the betrayer's own legitimacy and power. This ritual transformed a state agreement into a profoundly personal vow. The pact was no longer just between two kingdoms, but between two individuals whose honor was now physically intertwined. The weight of that dagger or the impression of that seal served as a constant, physical reminder of the person on the other side of the bargain. This practice made the stakes of diplomacy unbearably personal, ensuring that every decision carried the weight of one's own symbolic identity. But this symbolic hostage would soon be replaced by a far more chilling guarantee, one made not of gold and jewels but of flesh and blood. A child's life could become the ultimate collateral for a treaty. This practice, known as the hostage of peace, sounds brutal to modern ears, yet it was a sophisticated and surprisingly common tool of statecraft. From the Roman Empire to the dynasties of China, rival powers would exchange high-ranking individuals, typically the sons or brothers of the ruling family. These were not prisoners thrown into dungeons. They were treated as honored guests, integrated into the foreign court, and given an elite education. This was a deliberate strategy. By living within the enemy's household, a young prince would learn their language, customs, and values. He would form friendships and personal attachments. This created a living bond between the two powers, a human connection that transcended political rivalry. The unspoken threat was starkly simple. If one kingdom broke the peace, the life of the hostage would be forfeit. This made the decision to go to war intensely personal for a ruler. An attack was no longer just a strategic move against a faceless enemy. It was a direct act that would sacrifice a son, a nephew, or a beloved sibling. The ritual leveraged the most powerful human emotion, familial love, as the ultimate guarantee for political stability, but the system often had an unexpected outcome. Many hostages, after years immersed in a foreign culture, developed deep loyalties to their host nation. When they eventually returned home, they did not come back as spies or enemies, but as bridges. They became powerful internal advocates for peace and cultural understanding, having seen the humanity on the other side. This exchange of people, of future leaders, was perhaps the most profound silent agreement of all. It acknowledged that the surest path to lasting peace was not through fear alone, but through the subtle, patient work of building human understanding. And just as people could be exchanged to secure an alliance, so too could the most valuable secrets of a civilization. Sending your finest architects and engineers to a rival kingdom was an act of astonishing strategic generosity. This dispatch of master craftsmen was far more than a simple favor. It was a profound investment in a shared future, a silent declaration that one kingdom's prosperity was inextricably linked to another's. Imagine a powerful empire gifting its most advanced irrigation technology to a neighbor in a drought-prone region. This was not just an act of charity. It was a calculated move to create stability and wealth next door, transforming a potential zone of conflict into a thriving, dependable partner. The master craftsmen themselves became living envoys of goodwill. A team of stonemasons sent to help an ally construct an impregnable fortress was not merely building a wall. They were physically embodying a promise of mutual defense, their very presence a daily reminder of the alliance. The knowledge they imparted, from advanced metalworking techniques to architectural secrets, was a gift of immense value, a tangible piece of the sending kingdom's power. To share such proprietary expertise demonstrated a level of trust that words could never convey. It silently affirmed that the relationship was viewed as permanent and mutually beneficial, a partnership where both sides would grow stronger together. This created a deep interdependency, a web of shared knowledge and infrastructure that made conflict not just undesirable, but counterproductive for everyone involved. It was the ultimate peace strategy, building bridges of stone and systems of water that were far stronger than any parchment treaty. A city's gates swung open not to the sound of trumpets, but to the rhythmic, earth-shaking tread of 1,000 armored boots. This calculated spectacle was the first and most crucial move in the diplomatic dance. Before a single word of negotiation was spoken, the host kingdom would stage a grand parade of its military might. The visiting ambassadors, walking a carefully chosen route, would witness rank upon rank of soldiers moving with machine-like precision. They would see the glint of newly forged spearheads, the imposing bulk of siege engines, and the silent, disciplined presence of elite guard units. This was never an explicit threat of violence. It was something far more psychologically potent, a silent presentation of undeniable facts. The message was clear and cold, delivered without a single shouted command. You are now negotiating with a power that possesses overwhelming force. This display set the entire tone for the meetings to follow. A delegation that witnessed such organized strength would understand the futility of making arrogant or excessive demands. It grounded the upcoming talks in a stark reality, preventing fantasies of easy victory and forcing a pragmatic assessment of the situation. The ritual served as a non-verbal boundary, defining the limits of what could be reasonably achieved through diplomacy by first illustrating the devastating cost of failure. Yet this show of raw power was almost always followed by its exact opposite, a demonstration of the kingdom's cultural and artistic achievements, proving that this was a civilization worthy of respect, not just fear. A play performed for a foreign ambassador could speak more directly than any interpreter. After the displays of military strength and architectural genius came a more subtle form of communication, the performance of sacred dances or epic plays. This was not mere entertainment for weary diplomats. It was a carefully curated lesson in national identity. The host kingdom would present its foundational myths, its greatest tragedies, and its most revered heroes on a stage. Watching a sacred dance that reenacted a divine promise of protection, or a play where a king's downfall was caused by a single act of betrayal, the visiting delegation received a masterclass in local values. They learned what this culture celebrated, what it feared, and what it considered honorable behavior. A story about a hero who kept his word against all odds was a silent but unmistakable instruction for the negotiations ahead. It built a bridge of cultural empathy, suggesting that beneath the foreign customs and strange languages, both societies were bound by universal principles of honor, destiny, and justice. This shared artistic experience created a common ground, a reference point that negotiators could invoke later. It transformed the abstract concept of a foreign people into a community with a relatable story. The very space where this performance occurred, often a sacred temple or royal courtyard, was itself a powerful part of the message, a theme we will explore next. The very ground where diplomats met was a silent participant in the negotiations. The 10th ritual, the selection of a neutral and sanctified meeting place, was a masterstroke of psychological and spiritual statecraft. A summit was never held in one ruler's capital or the other's fortress, as that would immediately cast one as the supplicant and the other as the master. Instead, they sought out a third space, a location that belonged to no one and yet was respected by everyone. This could be a sacred grove dedicated to a deity both cultures revered, a temple perched precisely on a contested border, or a temporary pavilion constructed on a strip of uninhabited land between two kingdoms. This choice was profoundly symbolic. By agreeing to meet there, both leaders physically demonstrated their willingness to step outside their domains of absolute power. They voluntarily entered a bubble of truce, a container for peace where the normal rules of hostility were temporarily suspended. The sanctity of the ground itself enforced a code of conduct. To draw a weapon in a holy grove or to plot treachery within a sacred temple was not merely a breach of etiquette. It was an act of sacrilege, inviting the wrath of the gods who presided over the space. This ritual created a level playing field before a single demand was uttered. The leaders met not as a conqueror and a vassal, but as equals, subject to a higher divine law. The neutrality of the location made the temporary equality feel real and tangible, forcing a humility that was essential for genuine dialogue. This careful staging extended beyond the location itself to the precise choreography of arrival. The final step across the threshold was a moment of truth. The 11th ritual, the choreographed approach and entry, transformed a simple walk into a high-stakes performance of power and submission. Every movement was scripted, a silent language understood by all parties involved. The number of paces a diplomat took before stopping, the precise angle of their bow, even the exact moment they chose to lift their gaze, all carried immense symbolic weight. In the opulent court of the Byzantine Empire, this ritual reached its most extreme form. Foreign envoys were required to perform the proskynces, a full prostration where they lay face down on the floor before the elevated throne of the emperor. This was not merely a gesture of respect, it was a non-verbal declaration of the emperor's godlike status and the visitor's subordinate position. To refuse or to perform the act poorly was an instantaneous and irredeemable insult. A bow that was too shallow, a step taken too boldly, these were not minor breaches of etiquette. They were read as direct challenges to the host's authority, potentially derailing months of preparation before a single demand was even voiced. This meticulous dance of entry served as an immediate and unforgiving test. It measured the diplomats' willingness to humble themselves and adhere to a foreign power's customs, demonstrating respect not through words, but through the disciplined control of their own body. Successfully navigating this ritual signaled a readiness to engage within the established hierarchy, setting a psychological precedent for the talks to come. The silent negotiation of status was already over by the time the diplomat finally stood before the ruler. the terms of their relationship having been established by the path they took to get there. And within that hall, the silent conversation continued, dictated by the objects that filled the space. The throne room was a weapon of psychological warfare, meticulously designed to disarm a visitor before they spoke a single word. Every element, from the height of the ceiling to the chill of the stone floor, was a deliberate part of the silent negotiation. The ruler would be seated upon a towering dais, forcing the diplomat to crane their neck upward, a physical posture that instantly induced a feeling of inferiority. The path to the throne was often a long, intimidating walk, flanked by perfectly still guards whose eyes followed every step. The visitor was completely exposed, their progress measured in echoing footsteps, while the ruler remained a distant, immovable figure. This spatial choreography communicated an unshakable hierarchy with brutal clarity. In some Asian courts, a delicate but impenetrable silk curtain might hang between the envoy and the monarch. This symbolized a paradoxical message. The ruler was present and accessible, yet remained divinely untouchable, a being set apart from ordinary mortals. The hall itself was filled with symbols of power, carved lions representing strength, golden eagles symbolizing far-reaching dominion, and maps depicting the vastness of the kingdom's territories. The room was a physical manifesto of the state's ideology and might. To enter such a space was to be immersed in the reality of the host's power, a reality that made aggressive demands feel foolish and submission seem like the only rational choice. But within this intimidating theater, the smallest objects could carry the most complex messages of all. A sealed scroll carried more weight than an army's promise. This 13th ritual transformed a simple object into a profound test of faith. When an ambassador presented a rolled parchment, tied with a cord and stamped with a royal seal, the true negotiation began not when it was opened, but in the moment it was offered and accepted. The scroll likely contained the precise terms of an alliance or a peace treaty, yet by presenting it still sealed, the sending power demonstrated immense trust. They were handing over their entire negotiating position, their hopes and demands, into the hands of a rival, with no guarantee it would not be immediately rejected or altered. The recipient, by accepting the sealed document, silently vowed to consider its contents with honor and in good faith. This act bypassed the usual haggling and posturing, creating an immediate atmosphere of solemn commitment. But an even more daring version of this ritual involved presenting a completely blank tablet. This was not an empty gesture, it was the ultimate diplomatic gambit. A blank slate of clay or wax signaled a radical willingness to start over, to erase past grievances and build a new agreement from nothing. It declared that the relationship's potential was more important than any pre-written clause. The empty space was an invitation to co-create the future, a silent promise that the other party's needs and desires would be given equal weight. The physical object, whether a full scroll or a blank tablet, became a powerful metaphor. It was no longer just a carrier of information, but a symbol of the relationship's very essence, defined either by mutual trust in a preordained structure or by a shared leap into the unknown. This focus on symbolic objects extended beyond the human realm into the animal kingdom, where certain creatures were seen as living messages. A white elephant was far more than a magnificent gift. It was a diplomatic trap wrapped in velvet. The presentation of a sacred or exceptionally rare animal was one of the most cunning silent strategies in the ancient world. In the kingdoms of Southeast Asia, a white elephant, believed to be a vessel of divine power and royal fortune, was the ultimate prize. To receive one from a rival monarch was a double-edged sword. On the surface, it was an honor of the highest order, a recognition of your status, but beneath the glittering surface lay a severe logistical and financial burden. A white elephant could not be put to work. It required a special diet, a dedicated team of caretakers, and a lavish enclosure fit for a celestial being. The recipient was obligated to provide this extravagant care, lest they insult the sacred animal and, by extension, the giver. Accepting the gift meant silently accepting a massive, ongoing expense, effectively draining the royal treasury without a single hostile act. It was a clever way for a powerful kingdom to weaken a rival under the guise of generosity. On the vast steppes, the gift of a perfect bloodline horse carried a similar weight. It was a testament to the giver's mastery over the most vital resource of the plains, but it also created a lasting obligation. The animal was a living, breathing symbol of the alliance. Every time the recipient saw it in their stables, they were reminded of the bond and the debt. To neglect the creature would be a grave insult, while to honor it was to continually reaffirm the pact. This ritual ensured the diplomatic relationship remained at the forefront of the recipient's mind, a constant, costly, and beautiful reminder of a promise made. This intricate use of a living creature as a tool of statecraft finds its most intense expression in the next ritual, where an animal's life was not a burden to be maintained, but a symbol to be surrendered. The mingling of blood forged a bond deeper than any legal document. This 15th ritual, the Blood Covenant, was the most visceral and unbreakable pact imaginable. Two leaders would stand before their people, and in a solemn ceremony, they would each make a small cut on their arm, pressing their wounds together to mingle their blood. In other traditions, they would jointly sacrifice a prized animal, its death serving as a powerful omen, a silent prophecy of the fate that would befall anyone who violated the agreement. This act was not merely symbolic, it was a profound transformation of identity. By sharing blood, the leaders became fictive kin, blood brothers in the most literal sense. Their souls were now believed to be intertwined, their fortunes and their fates linked by an invisible, supernatural thread. A betrayal was no longer just a political misdeed. It was a rupture of this sacred, biological bond, an act that would invite curses from the gods and dishonor upon their lineages for generations. This ritual bypassed the fallibility of words and the loopholes of law, rooting the agreement in the most fundamental substance of life itself. It demonstrated a desperate, absolute need for certainty, a willingness to stake one's very essence on the promise of peace. After such an intense physical and spiritual commitment, the focus of diplomacy could shift to a more abstract but equally powerful force, the deliberate manipulation of time. A diplomatic mission could be delayed for months, waiting for the stars to align. The 16th ritual, the observance of astrological timing, reveals a world where human negotiations were considered just one small part of a vast cosmic conversation. Before a single delegate set foot on the road, court astrologers would meticulously chart the heavens, the position of planets, the phase of the moon, even the flight patterns of birds were scrutinized for signs. A meeting scheduled under the shadow of Mars, the god of war, was considered doomed to fail, destined to devolve into conflict. But a summit held when Venus was ascendant promised harmony and fruitful agreement. This shared belief in celestial influence created a powerful, unspoken framework for diplomacy. It forced a necessary patience upon often impulsive rulers. A king might be eager for war or desperate for a treaty, but if the omens were unfavorable, he was compelled to wait. This built-in delay allowed tempers to cool and more reasoned strategies to form. The ritual did something even more profound. It embedded the resulting agreement within a divine plan. A peace treaty signed under an auspicious constellation was not just a deal between two men. It was a pact blessed by the universe itself, carrying a weight of inevitability that made it far more durable. This practice demonstrates a fundamental ancient belief that human affairs were not random, but were intimately connected to the rhythms of the cosmos. While the heavens set the stage, the most immediate and tangible signals of intent were carried in the hands of every diplomat who entered a room. The ceremonial disarmament at the gate was a silent contract written in steel and trust. Before a single word of diplomacy could be spoken, a visiting delegation had to pass this first and most critical test. Upon approaching a rival's fortress or city gates, the leader and their entire retinue would be expected to lay down their swords, daggers, and spears. This was far more than a security precaution. It was a profound physical declaration of intent. By voluntarily surrendering their means of violence, the visitors were making themselves utterly vulnerable, proving through action that their mission was one of peace. This act of disarming was the essential key that unlocked the door, transforming potential invaders into honored guests. The host's response completed the covenant. By accepting the weapons, the ruling power assumed a sacred responsibility. They would often assign their own elite guards to protect the disarmed delegation, a powerful symbol that said, "Your safety is now my duty." This reciprocal ritual created a temporary but inviolable bubble of truce. Inside these walls, under this protection, the old animosities were suspended. A violation of this trust was considered an atrocity, a betrayal of the ancient, universal laws of hospitality that transcended any political conflict. It physically enacted the psychological shift required for true negotiation, moving both parties from a posture of defense to one of open dialogue. But the symbolism of weapons was not always about surrender. In a powerful inversion of this ritual, rival chieftains might instead choose to bury their weapons together in a pit before talks began, a joint act of renouncing violence that created a shared foundation for the new peace they hoped to build. A pit dug in no man's land became a grave for the instruments of war. The 18th ritual, the burying of weapons, was a final, physical act of closure. After the terms of a treaty were settled, representatives from both rival factions would gather at a chosen border. Together, they would dig a deep pit and cast into it a selection of their own swords, spearheads, and shattered arrows. This was not a surrender of arms to a victor, but a mutual renunciation. The act of burying these objects was profoundly symbolic. It declared that these tools of death were now obsolete, meant to be consumed by the earth and rust into nothingness. The chosen location itself was often consecrated, transformed into a sacred site that stood as a permanent, unspoken memorial to the peace. Future generations passing by would know this was a place where conflict had been deliberately interred. This ritual provided a tangible conclusion that words on a parchment could not. A signed treaty could be archived and forgotten, but a field where weapons were buried served as a constant, physical reminder of the vow. It was a commitment to a future where the very means of violence were rendered inert and forgotten, a powerful contrast to rituals that sought to legitimize power by connecting it to a hallowed past. A diplomat's journey to a foreign land often included a quiet, deliberate detour to a place of eternal rest. The 19th ritual, the honoring of ancestral graves, was a gesture that resonated with a profound psychological power. Before discussing trade routes or border disputes, a visiting leader would request to pay respects at the tombs of the host nation's revered founders, past kings, or legendary heroes. This was far more than a symbolic courtesy. By kneeling before the sarcophagus of a long-dead emperor or laying a wreath upon a hero's mound, the visitor was performing a powerful act of validation. They were silently acknowledging the entire sweep of the host's history, recognizing the legitimacy of their dynasty and the sacrifices that built their civilization. It was a way of saying, "I see the foundation of stone and blood upon which your throne sits, and I honor it." This gesture disarmed hostility at its root, appealing directly to a culture's deepest sense of identity and continuity. For the hosts seeing a foreign dignitary honor their ancestors built an immediate reservoir of goodwill. It demonstrated that the visitor was not there to erase their history, but to engage with it respectfully. This created a foundation of mutual respect that made contentious present-day negotiations far more manageable. How could one be aggressively hostile to someone who had just shown such reverence for your lineage? This ritual recognized that a nation's past is inseparable from its present power, and that honoring one was the surest path to influencing the other. This deep respect for lineage finds its most forward-looking expression in the next ritual, which shifts focus from honoring the dead to securing the future through the most precious resource of all. A royal wedding was far more than a celebration of love. It was the ultimate peace treaty written in the language of bloodlines. The 20th ritual, the Betrothal of Heirs, was a masterstroke of long-term strategy that wove the very fabric of two dynasties together. When a prince and a princess from rival kingdoms were promised to one another, their future marriage became a living, breathing bond. The betrothal ceremony itself was a grand diplomatic spectacle, a public affirmation that these two powerful houses were now inextricably linked. Gifts of immense value were exchanged not as tribute but as a down payment on a shared future. The children, often mere infants when the pact was sealed, were raised with the knowledge that their personal destiny was the cornerstone of their nation's security. This transformed the nature of conflict entirely. A future king could not easily declare war on a kingdom ruled by his own wife, the mother of his children. An attack was no longer just an act of political aggression. It became a form of domestic strife, a war within the family that threatened the ruler's own lineage. This ritual leveraged the most powerful human instincts, the desire to protect one's own flesh and blood, as the ultimate deterrent against war. It was a patient gamble, an investment in a peace that would only fully mature with the next generation, ensuring that the agreements made today would be inherited and honored tomorrow. While this strategy built peace over decades, other rituals were designed for a single, immediate, and unforgettable impact. The most delicate negotiations sometimes required nothing more than a simple walk. The 21st ritual, the silent walk together, stripped away the elaborate theater of the throne room. Two leaders would leave their advisors, translators, and armed guards behind, embarking on a predetermined path through a garden, along a riverbank, or around a city's walls. This act of isolated companionship was a deliberate plunge into vulnerability. With no audience to perform for, the masks of power could begin to slip. The silence that often accompanied these strolls was not awkward but profoundly meaningful. It created a space for a shared, unspoken experience, a mutual observation of the same landscape, the same breeze, the same sunset. Walking side by side, their steps naturally falling into rhythm, was a powerful physical metaphor. It symbolized a shared journey, a commitment to moving forward on the same path, quite literally in step with one another. Any conversation that did emerge in this private setting was stripped of diplomatic jargon. It became frank, personal, and direct. Away from the pressure of their respective courts, leaders could voice fears, float tentative ideas, or discover common ground on a human level, perhaps discussing family or shared interests. It was in these unstructured moments that true breakthroughs often occurred, as the political titles faded and the individuals beneath them found a way to connect. The ritual reaffirmed that peace was not just a document, but a relationship between people, and just as the body's movement could convey a message, so too could the fabrics that adorned it. A diplomat could speak volumes simply by changing their clothes. The 22nd ritual, the adoption of host attire, transformed fabric into a powerful language of alliance. Imagine a Roman senator known for his crisp white toga, voluntarily donning the patterned trousers and heavy cloak of a Gallic chieftain for a feast. This was not an act of mockery or mere curiosity. It was a profound gesture of respect and a deliberate act of empathy. By wearing the local garments, the visitor was making their body a canvas for a silent message. They were saying, "I am stepping out of my own world and into yours. I am making an effort to see through your eyes and feel what you feel." The choice of which item to adopt was itself a careful decision. Wearing a ceremonial headdress bestowed by the host was an acceptance of their spiritual authority. Adopting a military sash or belt signaled a recognition of their martial prowess. This symbolic shedding of one's own cultural skin demonstrated a flexibility and openness that words could rarely achieve. It dissolved the invisible barrier of otherness, building a unique rapport that made the diplomat seem less like a foreign agent and more like an honored, if temporary, member of the community. This gesture of shared identity often extended beyond clothing into the very spaces they inhabited. Steam rising from a shared bath dissolved the rigid protocols of the throne room. In the elaborate choreography of ancient diplomacy, the 23rd ritual, the shared bath, represented a radical plunge into vulnerability. From the sophisticated bathhouses of Rome to the tranquil hot springs of Japan, leaders would shed their ornate robes and with them the symbols of their rank. Stripped of crowns, armor, and insignia, they entered the warm water as mere mortals. This act of purification was both literal and symbolic, washing away the grime of travel and the preconceptions of rivalry. The bathhouse was a unique space, a sanctuary where the usual power dynamics were suspended by mutual consent. In the relaxing embrace of the water, surrounded by steam, the human body beneath the title became visible. It was far more difficult to view someone as an abstract enemy when you saw the scars of old battles on their skin or shared the simple comfort of the heat. Conversations in this intimate setting naturally drifted away from formal demands. Deals were broached not as dictates but as possibilities, spoken in hushed tones without an audience of advisors. Laughter could echo off the tiles, a sound more powerful than any legal clause in building genuine rapport. This ritual cleansed the relationship itself, allowing a foundation of personal trust to form, a trust that would then be expected to withstand the pressures of the negotiation table. After such a profound act of mutual exposure, the final step was to create a permanent, unchangeable record of what had been agreed upon. The soft clay captured every detail of the carved stone seal, freezing a promise in time. This act of impressing a seal was the final, definitive word in the silent language of diplomacy. After days or even months of negotiation, after shared meals and symbolic walks, the abstract terms of an agreement needed to be made real. Scribes would carefully inscribe the terms onto a damp clay tablet using a stylus. Then came the moment of ultimate commitment. Each leader would press their personal cylinder seal or signet ring into the soft surface, rolling or stamping it to leave a unique, intricate mark. This was not a mere signature, it was the physical embodiment of their authority and their honor. The seal's design was deeply personal, often featuring a protective god, a royal emblem, or a symbolic animal. By pressing it into the clay, a ruler was not just approving the words, they were implanting their very identity into the substance of the pact. The final step was to bake the tablet in a kiln, transforming the soft clay into a hard, durable ceramic. This process was itself powerfully symbolic. The agreement was no longer malleable or open to change. It was fixed, hardened, and made permanent, meant to withstand the ravages of time just as the parties vowed to withstand the temptations of betrayal. These sealed tablets became the silent witnesses, the unchangeable records that could be stored in royal archives and presented if disputes ever arose. They gave the invisible bond of trust a physical, undeniable form, a stone-hard reminder of the promises that had been silently forged. A treaty carved in stone could not be easily forgotten or denied. The 25th ritual, the commissioning of a commemorative stela, transformed a political agreement into a permanent part of the landscape. Rulers would order the creation of these massive stone slabs, often taller than a person, to be inscribed not with dense legal text, but with powerful, easily understood symbols. A scene of two monarchs clasping forearms, an image of traded goods like grain and pottery, or the carved figures of each nation's protective deities standing side by side. These were the hieroglyphs of peace. The stela was then erected in a highly visible location, perhaps at a bustling city gate or precisely on a once disputed stretch of borderland. This was a deliberate act of public declaration. It made every passing merchant, farmer, and soldier a witness to the pact. For an illiterate population, the imagery was instantly legible, a silent sermon in stone about the new era of cooperation. The material itself was the message. Unlike a parchment scroll that could decay in a vault or be lost to fire, the stela was built to endure centuries of sun and rain. Its granite or limestone bulk communicated an unwavering intention that this piece was meant to last for generations, as permanent as the earth itself. By placing this monument in the public eye, the rulers made the entire population a guardian of the agreement. The peace was no longer a secret between elites. It was a shared public trust, a story carved into the very bones of the land for all to see. This act of immortalizing an agreement in stone reveals a profound desire to speak not just to the present, but to the distant future. A young sapling, its roots carefully wrapped in burlap, awaited the hands of two former enemies. The 26th and final ritual, the planting of a treaty tree, transformed a political agreement into a living, breathing legacy. Unlike a stone monument, this symbol was not a statement of what had been achieved, but a hopeful investment in what was yet to come. The choice of species was a silent clause in the treaty itself. An olive tree with its silvery leaves and bountiful fruit spoke of a future dedicated to peace and prosperity. A mighty oak, slow-growing and resilient, symbolized an alliance built for strength and endurance across centuries. The physical act of digging the earth together, of placing the fragile tree into the ground and packing the soil around it, was a shared labor. It was a promise to nurture the fledgling relationship with the same care the seedling would require. As the years passed, that small tree would grow tall. Its spreading roots mirrored the deepening political and economic ties between the two nations, anchoring the agreement firmly against the storms of future disputes. Its expansive branches represented the widening benefits of the peace, offering shade and shelter to generations who had no memory of the conflict that preceded it. This ritual was the ultimate expression of a long-term perspective, a silent acknowledgement that the true value of diplomacy is not measured in immediate gains, but in the security and opportunities it bequeaths to one's children and grandchildren. The tree stood as a patient, growing reminder that peace, like the oak itself, is not a single event but a continuous process that must be tended with unwavering commitment. This final, beautiful gesture brings us to the end of our journey through these 26 silent strategies. From shared meals to buried weapons, from blood covenants to living trees, these rituals reveal a profound truth about human connection. They show us that long before complex legal language, our ancestors understood that the deepest agreements are forged not in ink, but in acts of shared vulnerability, mutual respect, and a common hope for the future. The silent language of ancient diplomacy was a global phenomenon, a sophisticated system refined over millennia. From the steppes of Asia to the courts of Europe, leaders intuitively grasped that a shared ritual could bridge divides that words alone could not. This was not a matter of superstition, but a profound understanding of human psychology. Trust, they knew, is an emotion built through consistent action, not hollow promises. By engaging in a performative act of commitment, whether sharing salt or planting a tree, they made their intentions tangible and undeniable. The success of this system allowed mighty empires with vastly different languages and customs to find common ground. It enabled the sprawling trade networks of the Silk Road to flourish and forged military alliances that deterred invasions for generations. These periods of stability were not accidental. They were the direct result of meticulously observed symbolic agreements. Conversely, the failure of a single ritual could unravel years of careful negotiation. A diplomat's refusal to disarm at the gate, a perceived insult in the seating arrangement at a feast, these silent snubs were often the final provocation that sent armies marching. The stakes were that high because the rituals themselves carried that much weight. We still live in the shadow of this unspoken legacy. The modern handshake between world leaders is a direct descendant of the ancient demonstration of empty hands, proving no weapon is held. The elaborate choreography of a state dinner, with its specific toasts and seating charts, mirrors the symbolic feasts of old. Even the practice of exchanging gifts, while often ceremonial today, harks back to the deep obligations created by the gift of a sacred animal or a master craftsman. These remnants remind us that the most critical part of any agreement, from a business deal to an international treaty, often lies in the unspoken gestures of mutual respect and the visible acts of good faith that make true partnership possible. The echo of that last planted tree reaches across the centuries, reminding us that the most profound diplomatic achievements were not written in ink, but enacted in a universal language of symbolic action. From the shared libation to the buried weapon, these 26 rituals formed a sophisticated global vocabulary, understood from the steppes of Asia to the courts of Europe. They reveal a timeless truth about human connection, that building genuine trust demands more than clever words or legal clauses. It requires the courage of a tangible gesture, a visible act of goodwill that proves intent beyond any doubt. Respect for a rival's customs, a willingness to become vulnerable, and a shared investment in a common future, these were the silent pillars upon which empires built lasting peace. In our modern world of instant digital communication and endlessly complex treaties, this ancient wisdom feels more relevant than ever. The next time you see world leaders shake hands on a global stage or share a carefully choreographed toast at a state dinner, look closer. You are witnessing the living echo of that ancient, powerful language, a ghost of rituals that once averted wars and built bridges without a single spoken word. If this journey into the silent heart of history has intrigued you, we would love to hear which of these rituals you found most powerful. Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more explorations into the world's greatest historical mysteries.